We were talking to a friend of ours yesterday, and he asked us how the allotment was going. And he mentioned that it's coming to the end of the season. This is the first week of November. We must be starting to close down the allotment and prepare for winter. And he was quite surprised when we told him that actually the allotment's still full and will be full all through autumn and probably going into winter as well. So I thought, well, why not show you around today, and you can have a look at what's possible to grow and to harvest in November. Why don't we start with this bed that's next to me here. These are winter cabbages. There's two different types here. There's a purple one and a green one. And with cabbages, they're named when you harvest them. So winter cabbages, you harvest in winter. So these should start to crop, well, in the new year. And we've just been removing the lower leaves for the past couple of months, really. And that helps to keep the slug population down. All of these beds are no dig, by the way. So we just layer the compost on top. Before the cabbages were potatoes. We grew two types of potatoes in the ground. A second early type, which are called Charlotte, and a main crop, which are called Desiree. We also grow a first early, but we grow them in buckets. So after we harvested the potatoes, we spread a new layer of compost on the ground, and these cabbages, which were sown a month before we harvested the potatoes, the plants were about that big, and as soon as we harvested the potatoes, we popped the cabbages in the ground, and they're growing on quite nicely. In the corner as well, we can also see some leeks. These were sown in April, and they should be ready to harvest along with these cabbages in the new year. They're a great winter crop. They can withstand cold temperatures, snow, etc. No problem at all. Now, we do also grow perennial leeks, which we'll do a video on in the future, which is the reason why we don't grow a lot of these normal leeks, so just a small batch here. In this bed just here, we have squash. This was sown in April, and I should just point out that at the start of the video, said that all the beds were full. Clearly you can see two empty beds next to this squash bed, and they also had some squash in them as well, which were harvested a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, the squash haven't been great this year, gonna be honest. Last year we grew them in one of the beds opposite, which we'll come to in just a second. They're much bigger and we had much better results. We had a great year with squash actually last year, but this is looking pretty feeble, to be honest. I think there's a couple of main reasons. That is, the bed's too small, and also you can see that our allotment is flanked by hawthorn hedges on both sides, and we think that the roots of the hawthorn come under the beds, taking the nutrients and water from whatever we happen to be growing in the beds. Some crops do okay with that, but we think that because squash are such hungry feeders, these are much better sown and growing in a bed not surrounded by trees. So something to consider. Okay, let's go ahead and harvest this squash, the biggest one. And to do that, we're just going to snip at the, well, not quite at the base of the neck, but let's leave about a couple of centimeters of the stalk. Simple as that. So after we've finished this video, we'll harvest the rest of these squash and we'll take them home, put them with the other squash that was in the other bed, and they'll just stay at home for a couple of weeks on the shelves to cure, which is where the skin hardens, and that helps to preserve it for storage over winter. Basically, we could be eating these at the end of winter or even going into April. And this is a delicious one called Thelma sweet potato squash. Give it a go. Just put that there, and then we can talk about the next bed, which is Romanesco cauliflower. These were sown in May, and they're an autumn cauliflower, so they should be ready anytime now, really. The heads are looking a little bit small. I think a couple of weeks they'll probably be ready. Even though they're an autumn cauliflower, you sow them in May and you grow them through summer. So they become established plants through summer, and they don't really like the heat. we don't have the luxury of any shade on this part of the allotment, so they were in full sun. We had quite a hot summer, lots of sunshine. We couldn't really protect them with any shade, but we did have to water them quite a lot, a couple of times a day. And the fact that these beds are no dig helps, because no dig beds retain moisture, help to retain moisture. And we have had a couple of failures. This one's got quite stressed by the looks of it. We'll probably cut that one out and just put it on the compost. One other thing I'll just say about cauliflowers in our experience is that they don't seem to like too much well-rotted horse manure if you're using that as your compost in your no-dig beds. We have done that before, and we were adding quite a thick mulch of well-rotted horse manure. It's very high in nitrogen, well-rotted horse manure, and that's great for your leafy green vegetables. But we found that for cauliflower, we're not eating the leaf part of the plant, we're eating the curd. So what we ended up with was massive plants of big green leaves with a very small curd, not really harvestable. So for that reason, we use, just on collies, we use our own homemade compost instead of well-rotted horse manure. We still do use horse manure on a lot of the other beds. And if you want to check out a couple of our shorts we've done recently, you can see how we make our own compost. Let's have a look at the next bed now, which are Brussel sprouts. These Brussels were sown at the end of March, and they're a winter crop typically, so it's a bit of a tradition for us to come down to the allotment on Christmas Day and harvest Brussels for Christmas dinner. Looking at them now though, we could get away with harvesting some now. You'll notice that some are blown. Yeah, most of them are pretty tight, looking like nice Brussels, but some of them, especially at the bottom, they are quite blown. That's fine, they're still perfectly edible. With us sowing these in March, again, just like the Romanesco cauliflower, we have to keep these watered during summer. They're growing during summer, basically, when it's really hot, can be really hot. So watering is essential. They can grow into quite big plants. This one's decided to grow horizontal. That's absolutely fine. Doesn't affect the Brussels. They don't have to grow perfectly vertically. You'll notice that there's a lot of blue piping on our allotment, and that is because we have to net pretty much everything because of pigeons. If we don't net the crops, they'll just get destroyed. Basically, it's a bit unsightly, but unfortunately we have to do it. Another reason we bought this netting is because brassicas especially can be quite susceptible to whitefly. Now this is the really fine netting. It's supposed to stop the whitefly getting in, but it's actually had the opposite effect. Doesn't stop the whitefly getting in, but it does trap them inside. The whitefly themselves don't bother the Brussels sprouts, the part that we eat, but they do infest on the leaves. They can do, and when that happens, it's best just to remove them completely. They're not going to get any better from that point. Just remove the leaves, put them on the compost, and not only does it make the plant look better just to look at visually, but if you don't remove the leaves, they'll just drop to the floor anyway, and that'll provide a great home for slugs. What you will find is, as you remove the leaves, it'll start producing new ones anyway that won't have the whitefly on, and that'll continue providing energy to the plant. So one crop that doesn't get disturbed by the whitefly is parsnip. So let's go and have a look at that in the next bed. Parsnip, another winter crop, just like pretty much everything we've seen so far. This is to harvest over winter. These were sown in April, but they actually failed. None of them actually came up. So we re-sowed them in June, and they're looking pretty good. So from that, we can probably guess a sowing anywhere from April to June, you're going to get decent results. One thing we can do is just brush the compost off the crowns of the parsnips just to see how they're getting on. So again, these are a winter crop. What we're going to find over the next couple of weeks or months is that the leaves will start to go brown, but that's fine. The parsnips themselves can stay in the ground and we can just dig them up as and when needed. They're not going to go woody or anything like that. And we could, in theory, harvest one now. So let's just go ahead and do that. Parsnips, the one crop where we do have to get the fork involved, even though this is a no-dig bed. Sometimes the parsnips can go quite deep, and you don't know how deep they're going to go. So just loosen the soil around the parsnip and just pull it out, basically, disturbing the soil as little as possible. Okay, so they're okay for an early harvest, start of November. So what we'll do is we'll pop these in the box. And one more thing I'll just say about parsnips is that, like carrots, they don't like being transplanted. Everything you've seen so far, we've sown the seeds in cells, and when they've grown on to be little seedlings, we've popped the seedlings out of the cell trays and put them in the ground. For parsnips and carrots, they don't like being transplanted. They'll fork and make weird shapes. So you have to sow direct, just get the seeds and sow direct in the ground. You have to keep them well watered until they germinate. That's probably the problem we had in April, maybe not watering enough. So let's move on to the next bed, which is right next to me. And in here we've got winter radish. I don't know if winter radish is that popular amongst gardeners. Don't know anyone else that grows it really. I don't know why. It's a great winter crop, again, winter crop, but this time you sow after summer, so you miss the summer heat. You don't have to worry too much about getting it through the summer heat. First week of August we sow this, and it's not like a salad radish where they're quite small, you eat them raw. These ones make much more of a decent sized radish, and you cook with them basically. You can either grow them in individually or in groups of 2. You can grow them in clumps of 3 or 4. We've tried that, but it does make smaller radishes and they become more fiddly to peel. There is a bit of pest damage, you can see, but what we generally find is that when we take them home back to the kitchen and we peel off the outer skin, the inside of the radish is absolutely fine. So just to demonstrate that, brought a peeler with me. This is a clump of 2. Just going to twist one out. You can see they're a decent size. This is grown as a 2. The other one's the same size. You can see the damage to the outside, just been nibbled a little bit, but once you start peeling, you can see it's absolutely fine on the inside. So we can go ahead and harvest this today, put that in the harvest box, and let's move on to the next and actually final bed of this part of the allotment, which is Swede. Swede is, you guessed it, another winter crop. Isn't it amazing how much is available to grow over winter? Everything we've seen so far, apart from the Romanesco cauliflower and the squash, everything will still be here in these beds come January, February, maybe even March too. We had a little bit of a problem with the Swedes, and that is again with the whitefly. It really ravaged the leaves. So what we did was we stripped all of the leaves. Was this at the end of September or the start of October? We literally stripped all of the leaves off all of the Swedes. The Swedes were just bare Swedes with no leaves at all. And you can do that with Swede, because the part of the Swede that we're eating is the root. It's the root will grow more leaves if you take all the leaves off. So within a couple of weeks, it has made a new fresh growth of leaves. I don't know if this is coming across on camera, but as I'm doing this, lots of whitefly are flying away, but not to the extent anymore like over summer where they absolutely destroyed the leaves. They're perfectly we can tolerate this amount of whitefly now, and that gives the plant just like what we saw with the Brussels, it'll give the plant extra energy, if you like. Now the leaves are green again instead of being sort of yellow and grey because of the whitefly. So nothing here to harvest today. These are definitely a winter crop. Size wise, they're looking okay. Some are decent size, some are quite small, but I think we're done for this part of the allotment now, where we've shown you all the crops that will grow for harvesting over winter. What we're going to have a look at now are the two beds opposite, which I mentioned earlier that our allotment is flanked by hawthorn on both sides. There's actually a bit of a break just here where there's very little hawthorn, and that's next to these two beds we're about to come to now. And we think that makes a difference in the strength of the growth in those two beds. Let's have a look. Now we can start to think about crops that we can harvest now rather than the winter crops that we've just seen. With the exception of 2 rows here of purple sprouting broccoli, this was sown again in summer, and these won't be ready until April. It's one of the few crops you can actually harvest in April. So not a winter crop, but it is very hardy. It will withstand all the low temperatures that we're bound to get over winter, frost, snow, whatever. To the right of me here, though, is a cabbage called cauliflower that we put out a short on. They're ready to harvest now. These are an autumn cabbage. Beautiful cabbage. Again, these beds are no dig, so we're not going to dig anything up. We just need snippers. And all we're going to do is snip a centimetre or 2 below the ground into the root. You'll notice that these cabbages have been completely de-leafed. That's a job we keep on top of quite regularly. If you don't do that, the leaves will just drop to the floor anyway, and that's a great home for slugs. So it's a very important job that we need to do to try and reduce the slug population as much as possible. Take the lower leaves off. Now that we've harvested this cabbage, we can cut the stem off. And what we're left with is a very handsome looking autumn purple cabbage that can go in the harvest. And that brings us nicely on to the final bed. And what I have next to me here is beetroot. If you get your timings right with beetroot, you could be eating them most of the year if you wanted to. This sowing was made in April, and they were transplanted into the ground middle of May, about a month later. They were sown in a cell tray 3x5, and we sowed them 3 or 4 per cell. Now the thing with beetroots is one seed can germinate into multiple seedlings. So it's possible you could end up with 10 or so seedlings per cell. That's going to need thinning out into the desired amount that you want to grow. For us, it's 3 or 4. So we thin them out to 3 or 4 seedlings per cell, and they get transplanted into the ground as that little clump. They grow very well together. We took the first harvest, I think it was the first week of October, and for that we just twist out the smallest of the beetroots in each clump, about golf ball size. A few weeks later we'll come back and do the same thing, and then again a few weeks later. So what we've ended up with now are all the individual beetroots, the last of each clump, growing on. And beetroots can withstand a bit of cold, but they can't withstand sort of a major frost, -3, -4. You want to be getting them out of the ground, really. But the last couple of years we've ended up with beetroots sort of that size, and they'll store really well. They don't go woody. You can cut them in half in the kitchen and you can literally see the juices of the beetroot coming out. So even though they might look woody from the outside, they don't go woody. So we're going to harvest one of these now. These are a great autumn crop. And all we're going to do is, for the beetroots, simply twist them out. I'll just bring that to camera. That's looking like a pretty decent beetroot. This is type sanguina, I believe, and that can go in the harvest box. Okay, we'll turn to the final crop in this bed. Well, not exactly the final, but you'll see in a minute. It's the final one that we can see, and that is carrots. These carrots were sown in the first week of July, and we forgot to thin them out. They make short, stumpy carrots. It's the first time we've grown this variety of carrot. I can't remember the name. It was an emergency buy because when we went to sow the seeds, we realised we had no carrot seeds left of the ones that we usually sow. So we nipped out quickly to Tesco's and bought these on an emergency. They're looking pretty good though. Yeah, but because we haven't thinned them out, there's about 10 of them growing in a clump here. Yeah, with carrots, you want to be pulling them up before the first frost. Again, carrots will get frost damage. They'll sort of go black and not very nice to eat. So let's go ahead and harvest these now. We've got so many in this clump. They're quite easy to pull up, unlike the parsnips. Okay, yeah, they're looking pretty decent. This one's loose as well. Bring these to camera. Pretty decent carrots. So the rest of these carrots will have to come up before the first major frost, really. I think there's one due next week. We're going to add these to the harvest box. And I did mention that carrots were the last crop in this bed. Well, it's not strictly true, because we put out a video a couple of weeks ago on sowing garlic, and we actually sowed garlic in this bed. So you can go and check that video out if you want to view that. It's not too late to sow garlic. You can sow garlic in November, no problem. We sowed ours in October. Also wanted to show you what's growing up these poles, which is runner beans, which we're saving for seed. Now we'll put out a video on seed saving and which crops we save our own seed from in the near future. One other crop that we can add to our harvest box is Chinese cabbage or Pak-choi, or both. This is a Chinese cabbage that we grow these in the greenhouse in buckets. We've just put out a video on how we sow and grow and harvest Pak-chois and Chinese cabbage, so do check that out if you want to know more about that, and to why we also grow in buckets rather than in the ground for this particular crop. We can harvest this either by twisting it out or snipping at the base. Let's go for twisting this one out, and we can add that to our autumn harvest box. So let's have a look what we've got in here. We've got squash, potatoes, cheating a little bit because they're in storage, but we can harvest them until next year really, so they're going in the box too. We've got carrots, we've got purple autumn cabbage, we've got Brussel sprouts, we've got winter radish, we've got parsnip, we've got the Chinese cabbage, of course. Have I forgotten everything? I think that's it, but that's plenty to be getting on with. So I hope this has given you some ideas and some inspiration. You can certainly harvest quite a lot in November. You just need to remember the sowing dates, which is most of the time over summer.